Caitlyn Clark, all right? The Indiana Fever star was named Time Magazine's Athlete of the Year earlier this week, and she took time to acknowledge that race played a role in her success this year.
They referred to her as privileged and claimed she didn't deserve it, but everything changed when Caitlyn Clark revealed the truth about race in the WNBA.
I had no problem with her being Time's Athlete of the Year. You see why I said that she should have been on Team USA? You see why I had to go off on the likes of Cheryl Swoops and others who were clearly distant and dismissive of her?
Whatever the case, now the true bombshell is when Stephen A. Smith unleashes hell on her detractors. Check out this story, which has the entire sports world talking right now. It's not just about basketball, it's about power change and who actually governs women's sports. Clark just accomplished something that the WNBA hasn't been able to do in 22 years. Stephen A. Smith is standing up to protect Caitlyn Clark, the biggest name in women's basketball, after she dropped a bombshell in Time magazine that is rocking the industry. However, this tale is much more complex than simply another sports scandal.
Here's a passage from the article in Times Magazine. Quote, "I want to say I've earned every single thing, but as a white person, there is privilege. A lot of those players in the league that have been really good have been black players. This league has been built on them. The more we can appreciate that, highlight that, talk about that, I think it's very important. I have to continue to try to change that. The more we can elevate black women,
Since this is where things start to become really fascinating, let me go out exactly what happened. What's crazy about this whole situation is that Clark, the same player who has been setting records one after another, was named Time Magazine's Athlete of the Year. Most athletes would simply take that loss and move on, but Clark did something that caught everyone off guard. She openly acknowledged her white privilege in women's basketball. Clark wasn't merely playing politics or checking a box when she discussed her privilege. She specifically mentioned how black players founded the WNBA, and let me tell you, that recognition struck a different chord. She essentially said, "Look, I know I've worked hard, but I also know there are some advantages I've had that others didn't."
Caitlyn Clark hasn't spoken against anybody. She hasn't assisted in denying anybody else the privileges they deserve. If anything, she's tried to provide assistance.
You would think that people would respect that kind of candor, but that's not how it happened. Some members of the WNBA community were discussing legends like Cheryl Swoops when they began to cast doubt on them. This is where Stephen A. Smith enters the scene like a hurricane because, let me tell you something, you can bet your bottom dollar that he has receipts when he gets upset about something.
Nia, there was resentment towards her, and here's why I said it was stupid. Because when she came into the WNBA, for 22 plus years, they had been flying commercials. They were begging for chartered flights. She arrives there, and 2 weeks later.
You want to know how, for 22 years, WNBA players had been pleading for chartered flights. They were out here flying commercial, dealing with delays, connections, and all that mess, and then Clark showed up and boom, 2 weeks later, they got those charter flights. This was something that no one else was talking about before Clark even played her first WNBA game, before she even suited up for the Indiana Fever.
And people were resenting her for it, like she was the cause of the problems that they had for the lack of recognition. No, she just happened to be born white.
However, this is where the story becomes even more captivating. Some people in the WNBA community started resenting Clark for this, and Stephen A. wasn't having any of it. He broke it down like this: how are you going to be mad at someone who's actually improving your working conditions? That's like being angry at the person who got you AR raise just because they're new to the company. Let's talk numbers for a second, because this is where Step A's argument gets even stronger. Since Clark entered the picture, attendance at Indiana Fever games has skyrocketed, TV ratings through the roof, the WNBA draft on ABC and ESPN breaking records left. And right now, Stephen A. made it clear, yes, the WNBA is still losing money compared to what they'd like to be earning. But for the first time in a long time, that trajectory is pointing up. This is where Stephen A. really showed why he's one of the most respected voices in sports media. He drew a parallel that nobody else was making. He compared the situation to the civil rights era, pointing out how during those struggles, black leaders didn't reject white allies who marched with them. They welcomed them, because guess what? When you're fighting for progress, you don't push away people who are trying to help lift everyone up the way Stephen sees it. And this is crucial. The anger is misplaced. If you're going to be mad at the system that's been holding women's basketball back all these years. Be mad at the corporate structures that didn't give the WNBA the Recognition, it deserved to be mad at the decision-makers who denied these athletes proper compensation and working conditions for decades. But don't be mad at Caitlyn Clark, because here's the thing about Clark, and this is what Stephen A. kept hammering home. She hasn't spoken against anybody. She hasn't tried to take credit away from the pioneers who built this league. If anything, she's doing the exact opposite. She's using her platform to highlight the contributions of Black players who came before her. She's acknowledging her privilege while actively working to make things better for everyone in the league. Think about it like this. When you've got someone with influence who's actually trying to help your cause, why would you push them away? As Stephen A. put it, a rising tide lifts all boats for those like Stephen A. Smith. The whole debate is so irritating because Clark isn't just rising on her own. She's attempting to bring the entire league along with her. However, this is where things become even more intriguing, and Stephen really highlighted this in his response. We're talking about a fundamental change in how we perceive advancements in women's sports, not just basketball anymore. Let me explain why this is so important. When Clark acknowledged her privilege, Stephen A. pointed out something that many people missed in this entire controversy. She wasn't just making a statement. She was starting a dialogue that the WNBA has needed for years. Consider how many athletes in her position would have simply accepted the recognition and remained silent, but she didn't. Let's look more closely at what Stephen A. was actually getting at. He brought up how the WNBA has been fighting for basic respect in the sports world for years. We're talking about things that NBA players take for granted, like decent travel conditions. The numbers don't lie. The league is seeing record-breaking viewership, sold-out arenas, and more media coverage than ever before. What's crazy is that it took someone like Clark, who publicly acknowledges her privilege, to finally start making a difference on these issues. However, Stephen A. wasn't done there. He began explaining why some of the criticism directed at Clark was not only unfair but downright counterproductive. Rather than applauding this momentum, some people are acting as though it's a bad thing because of who's bringing it. Stephen made here remarked, "You don't get to choose how positive change comes. What matters is what you do with it when it arrives," which is exactly what's happening here. It's a wonderful argument about how advancement actually works in sports. Clark's success doesn't diminish the incredible Black athletes who founded this league. If anything, she's using her position to elevate their voices and contributions. Here's another important angle that has been explored. He talked about how some members of the WNBA community are so preoccupied with who is enacting change that they fail to see the wider picture, which is that the league is finally receiving some of the things it has been fighting for, like improved travel conditions. Increased media attention. Let's talk about something that Stephen A. really emphasized. Unity is crucial to bringing about real change. He pointed out that historically successful movements for equality haven't succeeded by rejecting allies, but rather by forming coalitions, by bringing together people from different backgrounds who share the same goals. And that's exactly what Clark is attempting to do. Give this some thought. And remember that Stephen A. has emphasized this point repeatedly. When Clark discusses her privilege, she's not just acknowledging it passively. She is actively using her position to draw attention to the achievements made by the Black players who founded the WNBA and to discuss the significance of advancing Black women in the league without diminishing anyone's legacy, but rather enhancing it. Stephen A. also addressed the myth that Clark's success somehow undervalues other people's accomplishments, exposing it as a fallacious narrative that success in women's sports isn't a zero-sum game. The remarkable accomplishments of players like Cheryl Swoops, Lisa Leslie, and Dawn Staley aren't diminished by Clark bringing attention to the WNBA. On the contrary, it highlights their legacies. This is where Stephen A. truly hit the mark when he discussed how the real enemy isn't other players. The true struggle isn't against someone like Clark, who is working to remove the structural obstacles that have prevented women's basketball from progressing for decades. The true battle is against the mindsets and systems that initially made those obstacles necessary. Let's talk about something else honestly. The timing of all of this was highlighted by Stepina. The WNBA is at a pivotal point in its history and is finally receiving some of the resources and recognition it deserves. Television ratings are up, attendance is increasing, sponsorship deals are improving, and this is exactly what everyone has been fighting for. So why are some people acting as though this success is problematic simply because of who is driving it? Stephen A wrapped up his defense of Clark with this powerful point about legacy. He said that years from now, people aren't going to remember the controversy. They're going to remember this as the moment when women's basketball finally started getting the respect it deserved. They're going to remember how a player used her privilege not to exclude others, but to lift them up. And that's really what this whole situation comes down to. It's not just about Caitlyn Clark or Stephen A. Smith, or even the WNBA. It's about understanding that progress doesn't always come in the package we expect. Sometimes it comes through unlikely allies. Sometimes it comes through people who acknowledge their advantages and use them to help others. And as Steph A. Smith so eloquently put it, that's not something we should resist, it's something we should embrace, because at the end of the day, this isn't just about basketball, it's about recognizing that real change happens when people come together, when they acknowledge their differences but work toward common goals. And that's exactly what Clark is trying to do, use her platform to make things better for everyone in the game, not just herself. So the next time someone tries to make this about race or privilege or who deserves what, remember what Stephen A. Smith said: the true test of progress isn't who brings it, but what we do with it when it comes. Women's basketball has a chance to do something extraordinary right now. Let's not waste it by fighting the wrong battles. Additionally, consider what Stephen A. said about the business side of things. Before Clark, trying to get major sponsors interested in the WNBA was like pulling teeth. But now companies are lining up, seeing the potential that's always been there. Yes, perhaps it took someone like Clark to open those doors, but guess what? Once those doors are open, they're open for everyone. Stephen A. made this brilliant comparison that really puts things in perspective. He talked about how in business, when a new employee comes in and gets the company to improve working conditions, nobody says, well, we shouldn't accept these better conditions because of who got them for us. That would be ridiculous, right? So why are we applying that logic to women's basketball? And let's talk about something else that Steph pointed out: the international impact. The WNBA isn't just an American league anymore, it's a global brand. Players from all over the world want to play here. And when the league gets stronger, when it gets more exposure, when it gets better resources, that benefits everyone who loves the game regardless of their background. This is why Stephen A. keeps emphasizing that this moment is bigger than any individual player. It's about seizing an opportunity to elevate the entire sport. When Clark brings in new fans, those fans don't just watch her play, they discover A.A. Wilson's dominance. They learn about Breanna Stewart's incredible career. They hear about the pioneers who built this league from the ground up. Because at the end of the day, as Stephen has so powerfully stated, the goal isn't just to make women's basketball more popular, it's to make it more equitable. It's about creating a league where future generations of players, regardless of their background, can thrive. And if we're serious about that goal, we can't afford to let old resentments and misplaced anger hold us back. So let's take Stephen A.'s words to heart. Let's focus on the bigger picture, because this moment, this opportunity to transform women's basketball, it might not come again. And years from now, we're not going to care about who brought the change. We're going to care about whether we had the wisdom to embrace it when it came. If this deep dive into basketball's most heated controversy got you thinking, you're not alone. We're just scratching the surface of this game-changing discussion. Click the subscribe button and give bell a ring to receive updates on more incisive sports insight. Please share your opinions about Stephen in the comment section below. In support of Clark, please remember to hit the like button if you would want to see more content that gets to the point and breaks through the clutter. Until the next time, keep the discussion going.